welcome everyone to the People's House.
Mr. Speaker, will you please call the House to order?
The bill is passed. Who here in this chamber feels that their children should be punished for something that they did?
Hi, and welcome to Assembly Update. I'm Assemblyman Ramos, representing the towns of Brentwood, Bayshore, and Central Islip. Today is a very special day in the Assembly. We have started a tradition several years ago of trying to engage our community in what happens in the Capitol, and we bring up groups, a cross-section of leaders from our community to come up, to learn the process, to meet the key players here in Albany, and actually do their own lobbying, as opposed to only speaking to their local elected official. They're actually taking part in the process. With me today, I have two special guests who represent the interests of the CI schools district, and I have the president of the CI school board, Norman Wagner, and I have the superintendent, Carr. He's a superintendent of CI schools. Welcome to you both.
Thank you very much.
We had a very productive day today in which we were able to bring you, as well as members of the Brentwood School Board, as well as other leaders who have interests in different areas, to learn a little bit about government and to really interact with their elected officials and make known some of the issues that are of concern to them. So this is a great opportunity today to create a little bit of awareness with the public about some of the issues that CI schools are facing, some of the things that government needs to do to respond to your needs, and just creating a little bit of public awareness so the community can really take part in promoting some of the changes that are needed. So let me start with you, Mr. Wagner. I'll start with you to talk about what are the legislative priorities that CI school district faces this year.
Well, I was very impressed with Sheldon Silver's remarks today. He focused on education. He talked about providing progressive legislation to make certain that all children in the state had a formal, well-rounded education, which is exactly where Central Islip Schools is all about. He also focused on a topic dear to my heart, unfunded mandates, as an issue which most schools are dealing with. The tax cap for our district, which is property poor, high tax district, is an issue. We do struggle. We do have to make judicious cuts in order to get a budget passed by our community that's reasonable and will not overburden the homeowner. So that's one of our major issues, is to keep taxes as low as we possibly can, at the same time providing that well-rounded formal education that our children deserve.
Unfortunately, that doesn't exist right now. Well-rounded and equitable educational system throughout the state does not exist. There are differences within school districts.
Yes. And
the differences occur, from what I've seen up here, as a result of intrinsic problems within the system that create an inequity. I mean, just the very concept of funding schools based on the wealth of people's property. I mean, logic would tell you, if you have a community with millionaire mansions, that school district is going to have a windfall of funding from the wealthy community that they live in, and a poorer district is going to have less. So what happens is a district such as Central Islip depends on more state funding than it does from the homeowners.
Absolutely.
And any time the state has to cut, it ends up coming out of the homeowners.
Correct.
And exacerbates all the problems in the area. So it's really a problem, a structural problem that needs to be dealt with in order to really provide what our school needs. But there is definitely a two-tier educational system that I see on Long Island. And you, I know every year, you and Dr. Carr have to struggle to, within that defective system that funds the schools, to struggle to do with what it is that you're given from the state. But the good thing this year, and as you've done last year also, is that you're up here in Albany being proactive, and you're putting those needs right on the table to get caught on the radar.
And that will continue.
How do you see, Dr. Carr, this legislative year? What would be your legislative agenda?
There's two pieces that I see. Certainly the financing piece, as well as the accountability models that the state holds districts to. I'd like to follow up on the financing piece for just a second. There is a 2% tax cap unless there's a supermajority. Very difficult to get in the voting booth, a supermajority. School districts that have expanding populations, in which our school district has increased the student population from 6,300 to 7,100 in just a few years, and we are increasing in our population. Then to add a tax cap to that makes it extremely difficult to educate children with an expanding population, greater needs to expend funds to educate those children, yet we're limited by the revenues we can bring in with the tax cap. So if there was legislation that took into account school districts with expanding populations, where most school districts in New York State are actually shrinking in their student population, but looking at us few districts with the expanding population, it would be very, very helpful.
And, you know, every year we hear this mantra about New York City versus Long Island and school funding and equal funding. But the fact is, I mean, there is this impression that Long Island is wealthy and that our schools are well funded. But yet we have communities such as Brentwood and Central Islip who don't fall under that category. And we get just as underfunded as many schools in the urban areas. And again, where's the relief? A wealthier school district, when the state does not provide enough money, again, they have millionaire mansions there, so they have a windfall of tax revenues coming in for that school, and they just absorb it. Our school has no way to absorb it. So at the same time that we're cutting state funding, and then we limit the ability to raise any kind of funds any other way by the tax cap, it's got to give somehow. We have to do something within this formula to fix the intrinsic problem. Because it always works out to be an inequity.
Absolutely correct. And that's what's happening to our districts with the expanding student population. 2% tax cap is a wonderful idea for some purposes, but in districts with this expanding student population, a need to hire more teachers or just increase class sizes. Right. And that's just not acceptable for educators. I support
capping our taxes as long as special needs schools are getting the funding that they needed. As several years ago, the initiative, the CFE initiative, that would have brought funding. In fact, there was court precedent on it that would have brought funding to special needs schools and low wealth schools who have a higher number of learning disabled students, who have a higher number of non-English speaking students, need that funding because they have a circumstance that doesn't exist in a wealthier district. So, you know, these things have to be dealt with. At some point, New York State's going to have to pay the piper because there's a legal precedent for the CFE money to be paid, and that is one of the things that hurts our schools in our local area. Now, recently, we've had a situation with the refugee children at the border. And throughout Long Island, we've received a number of students. How many have been received in Central Islip?
Central Islip, we're using the number of 113, although it fluctuates on a daily basis. You know, some children will be moving in, some move out. So it's an ever fluctuating number, but that's our district as well. It's not just the immigrant children. We have a high transient rate in Central Islip.
Right. Well, with you know, the issue with the immigrant children, from the way I understand it, is that school funding comes in 2-year increments. So if you receive a large amount of children in 1 year, it's not a matter necessarily, certainly when you need the funding for it, but the problem is you need the funding for it now.
Yes.
Right? As student population grows, you do get more school aid based on student population, but you don't get it until the back end.
18 months later.
Right. So in order for CI schools to deal with the influx of a group of new children coming into the school, they either have to increase class size or cut somewhere else, which you know, if it was a matter of a couple of students, you normally absorb it, normal population growth. But the fact that this group has come here, it has an adverse impact because it's hard for the school to float that money up front. So we're working within the Assembly to try and find some way to address it. It was a federal decision to do this, and certainly we welcome the children, refugees, you know, as far as I'm concerned, people who have no fault in their circumstance at all, we must provide for them. but the schools must be given the tools that they need to provide for them. So we're working here at the state level to see what we can do. One of the ideas is to see if there's certain fundings that the school gets that they're limited on how they can spend it, to release those restrictions, at least temporarily, to allow them to provide for these students and then wait for the funding that they get on the back end. This would give the schools a little bit of flexibility. So we're working with state ed on that issue right now.
Excellent.
That's
Excellent.
fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. We were working with Congressman Israel and Congressman King on the federal level, but they were unable to secure a senatorial sponsor for the legislation that would have given us funding for these children. So right now it's a dead issue on the Fed level.
Well, I wouldn't say it's ever a dead issue. I mean, that is where it's incumbent on our constituents to call their senator.
And make noise, yes.
Right, to call their congressman, to keep the pressure on to make it happen. We can't just take it on the chin, because when you have the quality of education cut on any given year, it's not like a child, if a child is in 3rd grade and that's the year that services are cut, that the quality of education was poor, it's not like he can come back and do it again. An opportunity delayed is an opportunity denied. The fact that the services were not provided, the fact that the child attended an overcrowded classroom for that particular year is something that would have an impact on him later on in life. So we don't have the time, the luxury.
Well, to clarify my point, Assemblyman, I didn't mean it was a dead issue. It was dead in this legislative year.
Right.
We're going back after it again.
Right, but
now.
the fight goes on, certainly.
Yes,
the fight goes
absolutely.
on. But again, what I'm talking about from the perspective of government, unless the people speak up, you won't see elected officials responding to that need.
We'll be making noise.
What are some of the issues that we should create some awareness about in our community?
May I introduce another issue? And that is the accountability models that the State Education Department uses. They're antiquated, if accurate, which is questionable. However, one of the models takes into account graduation rates. For example, this year our graduation rate had dropped by 3% artificially. I say artificially because we received 31 children who were transient, came into our district in the 11th and 12th grades when they're in the graduating class. 7 of those 31 graduated. We give them an education, we do the best we can, and they're doing very well, but only 7 of 31 graduated. 24 did not, who arrived in our district in either 11th or 12th grade. Central Islip is held accountable for those children who just arrived in 11th and 12th grade, which artificially lowered our graduation rate by 6%. We would have had a 3% increase rather than a 3% decrease if we weren't held accountable for children who arrive late in their education.
So receiving transient students who, because of that specific circumstance, end up not graduating, reduces your graduation rate, and then it's unfairly held against the school as if it was the quality of their education that caused them to fail.
And so, yes, our quality of our education.
Yeah, those are things that, again, intrinsic problems that need to be looked at. It's not apparent to the naked eye, to the average constituent, that these things are happening. But unless we fix these basic problems, there won't be any kind of relief.
May I assist that just slightly? We had a chance to look at the graduating classes, the students in those classes over the past 4 years, and which year they entered into Central Islip. Those children who arrived in Central Islip in 6th grade or earlier are graduating at 80%. Now those 11th to 12th grade, we're graduating at 22%.
Wow. So that's great. So we're doing a good job within the means of what we had. I want to thank you all. We will continue the process of advocating for our schools.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.